On April 19, 1992, three members of the Ewell family, 59-year-old Dale, his wife, 56-year-old Glee, and their daughter, 24-year-old Tiffany, were shot to death in their Fresno home. The only surviving Ewell family member was 21-year-old Dale, who'd been spending Easter weekend with his girlfriend and her parents. The Ewells had been well-known and highly respected members of the community for several years. Their murder sent shockwaves throughout Fresno. People started double-checking the locks on their doors at night. No one felt safe anymore, especially when police failed to find the killer over the next 3 years. Today, we're going to dive into the case of the Ewell family murders and how the search for the killer led to dead end after dead end until finally circling back to the one person that seemed to have the strongest alibi of all. But first, we need to take a look at the type of people the Ewells were. Born in 1932, Dale Allen Ewell didn't exactly have it easy in life. His family wasn't rich. They were farmers in rural Ohio, a state that his dad, Austin Ewell, was born in and would later die in. Austin wasn't the sort of person that wanted to move around a lot. He preferred to spread his roots in one place, but his son had a different perspective on life. From the very start, Dale wanted to be someone. He was a driven, hardworking man who was born at the height of the Great Depression and spent his teens during the Second World War, so he knew the value of a dollar. After joining the U.S. Air Force, Dale took an interest in airplanes. These miraculous inventions had come to the fore during World War II, and they started to transform how people could travel around the world in its aftermath. All of a sudden, flying between continents became a matter of hours rather than weeks or even days. Dale saw the potential here and seized it. He started a company called Western Piper Sales Incorporated, where he sold small passenger planes. The business was a roaring success, bringing Dale the kind of wealth he'd never seen before. But the thing is, Dale never forgot his humble beginnings. He stayed frugal, keeping as much money as possible aside for the thing that truly mattered, his family. However, all of that money definitely had an impact on his life. For one thing, it made him an extremely eligible bachelor, so much so that he was able to court the heiress to a massive oil fortune named Glee Mitchell. But it wasn't the money that attracted them to each other. If anything, the money removed a major barrier, because both of them knew that the other person didn't need them to sustain their lifestyle. This allowed them to focus on each other's personalities, and it's safe to say that they really liked what they saw. In Glee, Dale saw a kind, generous person who dedicated her life to philanthropy, but also someone that lived an exciting life. Glee had spent time as a Spanish translator for the CIA, and she also sat on the State Bar of California, where she helped vet prospective judges. She was old money, which meant that she was powerful beyond words, but she only used those powers for good. As for Glee, she saw the kind of salt-of-the-earth goodness that lay in Dale's heart. She saw him for the self-made man he was, the sort of provider that most men she knew, men who'd likely inherited much of their wealth, could only dream of being. In 1961, when Dale was 29 years old and Glee was 26, they made it official. After tying the knot, their wealth kept reaching greater and greater heights, but you'd never have been able to tell just by looking at them. Neither of them wanted to show off. They weren't interested in status symbols or conspicuous consumption. The only thing they were willing to spend as much money as possible on was their family, or in other words, their children. In 1967, their first child, Tiffany, was born. 3 years later, they had a son whom they named Dana. All of a sudden, Dale and Glee's dedication to frugality started to change. They wanted their kids to have the best possible life, and they were willing to put up the cash required to make it happen. Dana and Tiffany basically got everything they ever wanted, within reason, of course. By the 90s, their parents were worth about $7 or $8 million, which is the equivalent of over $15 million in 2024. They used this money to make sure that Dana and Tiffany wore designer clothes, went to the best schools, and were set up for success. Dale, in particular, was determined to give his kids the life he never had. He still remembered the relative poverty of his childhood, and he didn't want his own kids experiencing anything close to that. This didn't just mean designer clothes and luxury cars, though. It also meant massive college funds that ensured Dana and Tiffany wouldn't have to deal with student loan debt later on. Tiffany seemed to take all of this in stride. She didn't think she was better than anyone else, and she likely knew that she was very lucky to be able to live this way. Dana, on the other hand, wasn't quite so humble. Ever since he was young, he wanted everyone to know just how rich he was. Those that knew him said that he was obsessed with status and wealth, and often said that he wanted to become a self-made multimillionaire by the time he was in his mid-20s. You might think that this was just an example of a boy who wanted to emulate his father. After all, Dale was a very inspiring man. He'd become quite rich himself by the time he was 25, and Dana clearly wanted to live up to his father's legacy. But at the same time, he didn't seem to realize that everything Dale accomplished came from hard work. He never had anything just handed to him. On the contrary, his wealth came from a mix of creating a highly profitable business and making extremely smart investments in the stock market. Dana apparently wanted all of the prestige and respect that came with success, but wasn't willing to put in any of the work, and so he spun a web of lies so dense that it was almost like he'd lost touch with reality. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every day. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot. After graduating from San Joaquin Memorial High School in 1989, Dana started attending Santa Clara University, where he majored in finance. He apparently wanted to become an investment banker, likely because he thought that that was the straightest path to acquiring as much wealth as possible. However, he wasn't satisfied with the promise of future riches. He wasn't satisfied with being able to go to college without having to worry about money, or the nice clothes he wore and the fancy car he drove, all thanks to his father. No, Dana didn't just want nice things. He wanted to be seen as someone who could afford nice things. In other words, he didn't want anyone to know that he was just a spoiled kid from Fresno with a rich dad. And so Dana started to lie about his life. He claimed that he was a business owner and a savvy stock market investor, and basically pretended to be his father. No one knew that he still lived with his parents or that he didn't even have a job. As far as his social circle was concerned, Dana Ewell was an independently wealthy man, and he spent what seemed like all of his cash keeping up this public image. He'd take his friends out for fancy dinners, buy them expensive presents for their birthdays, and sponsored their parties every chance he got. But perhaps the biggest recipient of Dana's so-called self-made wealth was his girlfriend, Monica Zent, who he started dating in late 1991. Now, Monica was a good-looking girl who had her sights set on law school, but that might not have been the reason for Dana asking her out. No one could have predicted this at the time, but there's a good chance that Dana started dating Monica because of her father, who was an FBI agent. Why would he care about her dad being an FBI agent? All of that will start to make sense once we get to the incident that killed every member of the Ewell family, except for Dana. For the time being, Dana and Monica seemed like a perfectly normal couple, albeit one with a massive power imbalance. Dana was still putting on a front as a wealthy entrepreneur, and his girlfriend was obviously going to get the most perks. In Monica's case, this meant that Dana went so far as to pay for her college tuition, according to some reports. This likely wasn't even necessary, since Dana's FBI agent father would have earned more than enough to pay her fees. But there's a chance that Dana was trying to make himself seem like a generous person. Unfortunately, he may have done too good of a job on that front. A local news reporter got wind of Dana's supposed success and wrote an article about him, one that became so widely read that even his parents got to know about it. Dale could tell that his son was pretending to be him to impress other people. He also realized that his son clearly didn't know anything about money other than how to spend it. This prompted Dale to change his estate plan. something that Dana would only find out about months later. However, there were rumors circling in the wider Ewell family that Dale's changes meant that he'd cut Dana off completely after he finished college. Dana heard about these rumors and realized that he may not be able to enjoy playing life on easy mode for much longer. This was when he started to hatch a violent plot to get what he believed was his. There's no way to know the exact timeline, but court records suggest that Dana Ewell decided to kill his parents sometime during the summer of 1991. This was before he started dating Monica, but he still had a fairly large social group at the time. One of the members of his social group was a boy named Joel Radovchich, who, similarly to Ewell, had dreams of becoming rich. He didn't have a millionaire father to support him, but he was still impressed by Ewell, likely due to his charming, magnetic personality. Radovchich was nothing like Ewell. He was introverted, lacked the social skills that seemed to come naturally to Ewell, and didn't have the kind of connections that would help him fulfill his dream of becoming a millionaire. This might have been partly why he wanted to help Ewell. While the exact details are unclear, we can say for sure that Ewell enlisted Radovchich's aid in killing his parents. He wanted them out of the picture because he thought that he'd get to inherit their millions. But there was a problem. He'd have to split all of that money with his sister, and while it was more than enough to make both of them rich for the rest of their lives, Ewell simply wanted it all. So far, he only knew that he had to kill his parents. The how and when were still to be determined. Radovchich agreed to be the one to pull the trigger, likely being promised a handsome payment by his rich friend. In the summer of 1991, records show that Radovchich had started looking up how to create a homemade silencer and had started asking his friends where he could buy a gun. As for Ewell, he wasn't going to play a direct role in the murder of his family. He'd already set himself up for a powerful alibi when he started dating Monica. At some point, Ewell and Radovchich agreed that the deed was to be done on Easter Sunday, when the family would return home from an annual beach trip. Ewell planned to visit Monica's parents that Easter. The timing was perfect, and he'd be able to tell authorities that he'd been at the home of a literal FBI agent at the time of the killings. Dale, Glee, and Tiffany spent much of Easter weekend 1992 at a beach house they owned a couple hours away from Fresno. They spent that Saturday playing tennis, walking along the beach, and just enjoying each other's company. Dale decided to fly one of his planes home the next day, while Glee and Tiffany drove. The mother and daughter ended up arriving before Dale, but what they didn't know was that Radovchich was lying in wait. He'd managed to buy a gun by this point, and his partner in crime had likely given him a key to the family. Some reports suggest that Radovchich had shaved all of the hair off his body and hadn't used the bathroom either, with both things meant to prevent him leaving behind any DNA evidence of his presence. When Glee and Tiffany entered their home, Radovchich opened fire, killing both of them instantly. Glee was shot 4 times, while Tiffany was only shot once. To this day, no one knows why Radovchich riddled Glee's body with bullets. Did he have a special grudge against her? Evidence shows that he'd met Glee and Dale at least once, and even stayed over at their home. Could it be that he bore some kind of resentment against his friend's mother? And if so, why? Regardless, Radovchich still had one target left. When Dale came home, he probably didn't even have time to see his dead wife and daughter laying on the floor. The shot came quickly and silently, with Radovchich having successfully made a silencer after his research. All 3 family members were now dead, and Radovchich's part in the plot was over. He left their corpses in the family home and headed out, while Ewell prepared himself for the role he was meant to play. His Easter weekend had gone quite well, so well in fact that he decided to stay for a couple more days. During this time, he tried to call his family home, fully aware that all of the occupants were now dead. The only reason for this was to solidify his alibi. Eventually, he told Monica's father that he was worried about his parents. Every word he said, everything he did over those few days, was tailored to give him plausible deniability, and it almost worked. At 9 a.m. the next day, the family's maid Juanita Avenita arrived and made a shocking discovery. She phoned the police, who arrived on the scene and started an investigation into what undeniably seemed like homicide. Several clues were found, including a few missing 9mm rounds from a box that Dale had purchased in the 70s, and strange yellow fuzz on the bullets found inside Glee's corpse. However, perhaps the strangest thing about the crime scene was the complete lack of DNA evidence. Radovčić had done his job well, but with that said, it didn't take long for police to start looking into Ewell as a person of interest. In fact, one of the detectives assigned to the case said that he got a funny feeling about the young man as soon as he walked through the crime scene. Ewell seemed more focused on cleaning the scene up, and he didn't seem particularly emotionally affected by the death of his family. Ewell's behavior in the aftermath of the murders also made him seem extremely suspicious. For one thing, he couldn't stop asking about his father's will. His uncle ended up receiving it first and informed Ewell that his father hadn't made any specific funeral arrangements. Even when confronted with this difficult decision, Ewell could only think about the money. That's when his uncle broke the bad news. Ewell wasn't going to become rich overnight like he thought. He'd be receiving a few $100,000 from his parents' life insurance, but the millions of dollars worth of investments his father had made would be out of his reach. According to the arrangements Dale had made, the entire fortune would be put into a trust, and his son would only receive the money he needed to pay for basic expenses and for college. Once he turned 25, Ewell would receive the profits from his inheritance, but he wouldn't be able to access the principal amount. For that, he'd have to wait until he was 35, with the first half of the principal being given to him when he was 30. Dale's arrangement was clearly meant to teach his son a thing or two about money. He knew that if Dana received the whole amount, he'd just sell off the company and blow through his father's life's work without putting in a single hour of honest work himself. The thing is, even this setup would have made Dana far luckier than the average American, but that's certainly not how he saw it. Quite on the contrary, when Dana found out that he'd have to make do with having his expenses taken care of, plus the $300,000 insurance payout, the spoiled brat he'd always been, deep down, emerged with a vengeance. He reportedly flipped over a table and started screaming at his uncle, asking him why his dad would do something like that. It took 3 years for police to make a proper case against Ewell and Radovčić. Detectives noticed that they used payphones a lot as well as pagers, which indicated that they were paranoid about being overheard or recorded. Radovčić was also seen partially undressed outside Ewell's family home a few months after the murder. He'd apparently been living in the master bedroom, and his friends was perfectly fine with that. A detective wearing a wire once approached Radovčić while he was at a payphone and recorded him saying that the investigators didn't have any evidence and that they'd try to catch Ewell in a lie. They also noticed that Radovčić and Ewell referred to the murders as the three-shirt deal, a poorly coded message that didn't take much time for them to track. On March 2, 1995, Ewell and Radovčić were arrested and charged with murder. They were convicted on all charges in May of 1998, and the prosecutors started pushing for the death penalty. It was only because the jury couldn't agree that the two culprits managed to live. They received life sentences without parole instead, with Ewell spending the remainder of his days in protective custody at California State Prison. He later found religion and started participating in a prison pen pal program, and in his bio admits to having done terrible things. He seems to have forgiven himself to some extent, although he also admits culpability. However, he also seems to think that he deserves to go free, even applying for a presidential pardon in January of 2022. As for Radovčić, he's been in Mule Creek State Prison this whole time. Unlike his co-conspirator, he's maintained a low profile. It's highly likely that the horror of having killed 3 innocent people continues to haunt him to this day. So what do you think of this case? Do you think Dana Ewell and Joel Radovčić were the only ones involved, Or did Ernest Ponce have a role to play as well? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you like the way we create these videos and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.